After my most recent breakup, I had to make a tough decision. I moved back in with my family. My ex and I had been living together in Boston in this small but cozy apartment. If I could offer one piece of advice, it's never sign a lease with someone you've only recently started dating. Let's just say he turned out to be nothing like I thought he was. So here I am, back in Western Massachusetts. If you've been to Massachusetts, you know how it gets more rural the farther west you go. And when I say rural, I mean it. I'm not a country girl by any stretch. I love the energy and opportunities of being near a city, especially since I'm still in my 20s. But now I'm living in an area that feels almost lifeless. Quiet can be good sometimes, but this level of quiet, it's unnerving. The plan is to stay here temporarily, just until I can afford my own place again. Boston, though, is off the table for reasons I'd rather not relive. In the meantime, I've gone back to working at the urgent care facility I was at before moving out. Luckily, they welcomed me back like I never left, even though I made it clear this would only be temporary. The downside? They've stuck me on overnight shifts. Now, overnight shifts have their perks. There's rarely much to do, so the work itself is easy. But they completely wreck your sleep schedule and any semblance of a social life. Not that there's much of a social scene out here anyway. The start of a normal night. The other night, after wrapping up my shift around 4 a.m., I stopped at a local bagel place that opens early. It's one of the few food spots open at that hour, and they serve more than just bagels. I grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad, planning to eat at home. On the way back, I had to make a quick stop for gas. I pulled into the Shell station. It's one of those 24-hour spots with a massive parking lot. Strangely, it's always empty, even during the day. I decided to pay inside to save a few bucks since gas prices have been insane lately. When I came back out to the pump, I noticed another car had pulled in, a blue sedan. A guy got out, and as I started fueling my car, he did the same. But then he walked over to my pump. He smiled and said, "Want to see a funny trick?" Now, I'm not a fan of random interactions with strangers, especially at 4 a.m. Still, for some reason, I responded, "What's the trick?" He did that old, ridiculous, pulling your finger off trick, the one that's more suited for entertaining kids. He kept looking back and forth between his hands and me with this strange, sarcastic smile. I gave him a polite, fake laugh, hoping he'd leave. But he didn't. He kept doing the trick even after I turned away. The nozzle clicked, signaling my tank was full. I was so relieved. I quickly hung up the pump, hurried inside to get my change, and came back out. By then, the guy had vanished, but his car was still there, with gas still pumping into it. It gave me a weird feeling. I got into my car and instinctively checked the back seat. Thankfully, it was empty. I locked my doors and drove home. The strange night at home. When I got home, the neighborhood was its usual silent self. I parked, grabbed the spare key my parents hide outside, let myself in, and immediately put the key back in its hiding spot. Quietly, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the kitchen. I was starving and eager to dig into my sandwich and salad. As I was eating, I heard it, the sound of the front door unlocking. Then, it opened and closed. I froze. My first thought was that one of my parents had woken up early. I called out, "Mom? Dad?" but got no response. Heart pounding, I tiptoed out of the kitchen to check the foyer. It was empty. The door was locked. A wave of panic washed over me. I ran upstairs and burst into my parents' room. Both of them were fast asleep. My loud entrance woke them up and I stammered, "Someone's in the house." My dad sprang into action, grabbing the nearest thing he could use as a weapon. He rushed downstairs, flipping on every light as he went. My mom and I followed, terrified. When we got to the front door, my dad checked the spot where we hide the spare key. It was gone. We began searching the house. My dad was thorough, checking every room, every closet. When he went to the basement, I stayed upstairs, too scared to follow him down there. But something told me to double-check the dining room. I crouched down to look under the dining table. And there he was. It was the man from the gas station. He was curled up under the table, his wide eyes staring right at me, I screamed, a blood-curdling, primal scream. My mom screamed too. My dad came running up the stairs just as the man scrambled out from under the table. My dad, who's in his 60s, didn't hesitate. He lunged at the guy. The man fought back, but my mom and I joined in, hitting and pushing him as hard as we could. Finally, he broke free and bolted out the door. We called the cops immediately. They arrived quickly, but the man was long gone. That night, my dad wedged a chair under the doorknob and stayed in the living room with a makeshift weapon, just in case. The next morning, he replaced all the locks, and we swore never to leave a spare key outside again. Reflection: I can't help but feel responsible for what happened. I'm sure that man followed me home, maybe with his headlights off, which is why I didn't notice him. It's terrifying to think how close my family came to serious danger. This whole experience has solidified one thing for me. I need to move out of here as soon as possible. The road trip set up. Months later, I embarked on a road trip from New York to Florida. It was supposed to be a peaceful drive, just me, the open road, and my thoughts. But the journey took a dark turn in the quiet hours of the morning. Around 4 a.m., while passing through New Jersey, hunger struck. Spotting a Wendy's along the highway, I pulled in, hoping for a quick bite. The parking lot was eerily empty, and when I reached the door, I realized the place wasn't open yet. Disappointed but ready to move on, I returned to my car, eager to get back on the road. Just as I was about to leave, there was a knock on my driver's side window. Startled, I turned to see a man standing outside. He appeared average, jeans, a hoodie, no immediate signs of danger. He gestured for me to lower the window. Hesitant but not wanting to seem rude, I cracked it slightly. "My car battery's dead," he said, his tone casual but with an edge of urgency. "Can you give me a jump?" For a moment I debated. It was late, I was alone, and something about the situation made my stomach churn. But then came that nagging voice in the back of my mind, the one telling me to be a good person, to help someone in need. Against my better judgment, I nodded. We moved our cars into position, headlights facing each other under the dim glow of the parking lot lamps. I grabbed my jumper cables and connected them to my battery, then to his. He hopped into his vehicle, trying to start it, but the engine sputtered and died. Again and again it refused to turn over. Frustration flickered across his face. "Let me try one more time," he said, fiddling with something in the car. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the roar of engines. 2 pickup trucks sped into the lot, their headlights blinding as they skidded to a stop, one in front of my car, the other behind it. I was boxed in. Panic surged through me like ice in my veins. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup. Instinct took over. Without a second thought, I threw my car into park, grabbed my keys, and bolted toward the nearby woods. Branches scratched at my arms and face as I stumbled deeper into the trees, heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. From the safety of the shadows, I listened. Voices called out, sharp and angry, followed by the sound of footsteps crunching across gravel. "Where is he?" one of them barked. I held my breath, crouching low and praying they wouldn't come too close. Minutes felt like hours as I stayed hidden, the darkness wrapping around me like a shield. Eventually, their voices grew fainter, and the footsteps receded. They'd given up. When I finally emerged, the parking lot was silent. My car was still there, but the inside had been ransacked. My luggage, most of my clothes, and a few other belongings were gone. They hadn't wanted the car. They'd wanted everything in it. Later, the police informed me that the vehicles involved had fake or missing plates, making it nearly impossible to track down the culprits. The officers were sympathetic but realistic. The odds of recovering my stolen items were slim. That night changed me. I learned that not every plea for help is genuine, and that sometimes, trusting your instincts is the difference between escaping unharmed and becoming a victim. The road can be a lonely place, but it's the people who hide in its shadows that truly make it dangerous. The creepy rest area encounter. It was during yet another late-night drive when I found myself pulling into a small, dimly lit rest area. The parking lot was eerily silent, with only one other car parked in the farthest corner. Its windows were tinted, and there was no sign of movement inside. I chalked it up to someone resting and made my way to the restroom, feeling the unease that only deserted places at odd hours can bring. As I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting unsettling shadows across the tiled walls. The room seemed empty at first glance, until I saw him. A man was standing in the far corner of the restroom, completely still, with his back to me. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there like a statue. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize the situation, but the oppressive tension made it hard to think. Without saying a word, I quickly turned around and left, hoping to put as much distance between us as possible. I drove for another hour, trying to shake off the lingering unease. When I reached the next rest area, it seemed safer. There were a few more cars in the lot, and the lights were brighter. I convinced myself it was just my overactive imagination and decided to stop. This time, I hurried to the restroom, trying to get in and out quickly, but as I sat there, I suddenly heard the faint echo of footsteps approaching from the entrance. They were slow and deliberate, each step growing louder against the tiled floor. My pulse quickened as the sound stopped. Right in front of my stall, I glanced down and froze. A pair of shoes stood motionless at the door, the toes pointed directly toward me. My stomach dropped as dread washed over me. It wasn't just the eerie silence, it was the sinking feeling that this could be the same man from before. Fighting back panic, I fumbled for my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, putting the call on speaker. The operator's voice broke the silence, and I loudly described my situation, making it clear that I wasn't alone and help was on the way. The tension in the air was suffocating. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. When I finally emerged, the parking lot seemed deserted again. Minutes later, police arrived and searched the area thoroughly, but they found no one. Despite their reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible. Even now, the memory of those shoes, silent and threatening, still sends chills down my spine.